Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Play the Tape. I am your host, Derek J. Fields. Listen, I am a little under the weather. That's why my voice sounds a little raspy, but we're still going to come here and do what we do best, and that's provide experience, strength, and hope to those feel that there is no hope. On this platform, on today, full disclaimer, we are not licensed or clinical social workers, drug and alcohol counselors, or clinical therapists. They have and will be on the show for another perspective on how to look at mental health, substance use, and recovery. My guest today is a brother of mine that I met doing a NAMI, a National Alliance on Mental Illness, men mental health expo, and his story was very moving and inspirational. And he loved the phrase that I quoted: recovery is inspirational change moving forward, which I believe that is, and is something that we can all inspire to and looks different from everyone. My guest today is a brother of mine. He is a person in long-term recovery. He's a veteran of the United States Army, a peer support specialist, a host of Sitting with Sean podcast, an alumni of the National Therapeutic Courts. His experience with addiction, mental health disorder, and recovery is here to help others who are struggling in their life situations and circumstances to overcome their situations. Son uses his platform to spread hope to those who feel hopeless and to offer guidance to those who feel lost. My guest today is my brother Sean Young. How you doing, brother?
I am doing great. I'm doing great. How you doing, brother?
And I'm blessed to be here. I'm very grateful that you're here, and again, I'm honored, and thank you so much for doing the show. I appreciate you so much. For being up here and sharing your experience, strength, and hope, and letting others know, like your bio said, like your intro said, giving hope to those who feel lost. That's very powerful. You can start wherever you want in your testimony, wherever you want in your journey. Sean Young, the floor is yours.
Alrighty. Well, first off, Derek, I want to say thank you for having me here. Um, I'm grateful to be able to share my experience, strength, and hope with anybody and everybody that will listen. Um, because my journey looks different than your journey, looks different than the next person down the road, and I really like the quote that you said at the beginning, but also there's another quote that really has stuck with me in my recovery, and that's going to come later on into play. But I'm going to say it here: the opposite of addiction is connection, right? The opposite
Mm.
of addiction is connection, and I never understood that until very recently. But we're going to get to that. Anyways, I always like to start off and say I am a person long term recovery. What that looks like for me is that I have not put a mind altering substance in my body since December 7th, 2019. And what that's
Mm.
been able to give me do, or what that's been able to do for me is allow me to be a better human being, work on myself to be a better human being, not just for myself, but for my kids, for my significant other, and for humanity, because if I was still in that place, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I fully believe that. So starting off, I like to say I was born into trauma. Right, I was born into addiction. My mom and my father were both addicts, alcoholics. One would enter into recovery and then relapse. The other was a dry drunk. But when I was a kid, my first exposure to trauma was when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Every boy or every child, has that one parent that they look up to and want the approval of that parent. And and if you don't get that approval, then you do anything and everything to gain that approval.
Right.
So I learned at a young age that my trust and learning to trust was a hard concept for me. Right, I didn't know the foundation of trust. My foundation of trust was broken in one instant. I was in the bathtub. I was about 3 or 4 years old, splashing around. My dad didn't like that I was splashing around. He walks in, grabs me by my arm, pulls me out, and beats my ass with a bear with belt. Now this is back in the day where, like, They were transitioning and calling that abuse, but they hadn't formally called it abuse. So that happened, and shortly after that happened, we got a knock on the door. And now I lived in Hagerstown, Maryland at the time. This house that I lived in looked like the Adams family house, but it was yellow. So it was pitch yellow. It was the ugliest color I've ever seen in my life. I could still drive by there and see where it stood. But got a knock on the door, and it was the police, and it was some people in suits. And they started taking pictures of us now. Derek, I'm a professional wrestling fan. I was posing like Hulk Hogan, all over the place,
Yeah.
no shirt on. I didn't know what they were trying to do. They were trying to get pictures of the bruises.
Right. Right.
And I thought that they were just taking pictures, right? So I was, a little machismo back in the day. And so they were trying to get pictures for proof. Well, they got the proof that they wanted. And then they found more on my sister. So they ended up taking my sister and I away, and we got put into foster care. And right away, we get scooped up into this home, and it's a nice Christian home. The family's amazing, but they didn't understand that kids don't always need what they want, right? So I got anything and everything I wanted from them, and
Hmm.
that's how it was for 6 months, right? And I had a hard time grasping the concept of no. So then they get a knock on the door. My grandparents on my dad's side are there, and they said, "Hey, we just got custody of the kids." So we got packed up into a car, moved down to Sharpsburg, Maryland. Now, Sharpsburg is the home of the Antietam battlefield. If you guys don't know, it's like one of the bloodiest battles, if not the bloodiest battle in all the Civil War. And so I lived in there, and history is a huge part of my upbringing. I love history, but also history teaches us that uh, events tend to repeat themselves. And so I I get to my grandparents' house. My dad has full access to me and my sister, which
How
is
how
terrible.
old how old are you and your sister at this time that this is transitioning, that this is happening?
So I'm about 6 at the time, and my sister is about 2, right?
Okay.
So the abuse had happened for a while, but what really sparked it off was the shower incident, and then they found bruises on my sister as well. But that's not my story to tell. So we get to my grandparents' house. My dad's a truck driver at this point, so he's going cross country. He's got a CDL and everything, and my grandparents were very authoritarian. They were Mennonite, and I don't know if you know what Mennonite is, but it's like pretty much a step above Amish, right?
Okay.
And so my grandmother was a stay at home mom. My grandfather worked for the University of Maryland. My grandmother was judge and jury. My grandfather was executioner. So my grandfather had a heavy hand. He was a Vietnam vet. I loved him to death, but that man scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And so anytime that my grandfather wasn't home, my grandmother would use the scare tactic. I'm going to tell your dad, right? So that I'm already getting this sense of fear as a kid of authority figures because of that. Like I don't. It's not that I don't respect them, but it's the wrong kind of respect.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
had that. I had that too. My mom would use that. She would to be put the belt and the wood to you as well, but it wasn't nothing compared to what my dad, the threat of my dad. I'm gonna whoop your ass, and then your dad is coming to do the same thing, and then
yeah.
she would leave. That would make me. That would I never understood that. Why you gotta go? Why you gotta leave? What you leaving for? You ain't gonna be no witness. So
Yeah,
I'm with you when it comes to the fact of I'm gonna tell your daddy, and that holds some weight,
yeah,
man. Yeah.
yeah, it does. And so, in the background, what I didn't know was happening was that my mom and my dad were still together, but they were fighting off and on. And eventually, my dad ended up leaving. Now, to add to that, periodically, child services would send somebody over to the house unannounced or announced. So one particular time they sent somebody unannounced over to the house, and the caseworker just literally turned the corner and witnessed my mom and my dad getting into this argument, fighting, screaming at each other. and my mom struck my dad, and the caseworker was like, "We already know who was at fault." Right.
Hmm.
So caseworker ended up leaving. Didn't tell my dad anything. My dad ends up leaving and moving to Pennsylvania, up north, in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is like right on Lake Erie. And as soon as he does that, they were like, "Hey, you can get custody of your kids now." Like without a full investigation as to what happened or any of that. So as soon as they said that, they set my sister and I down, and they said, "Who would you much rather live with?" And as much as I was terrified of my father, like I wanted to live with him, right? I wanted dad approval that my dad loves me. So I said my dad. And so we packed our stuff up. And this is probably about the age of 10. So I lived with my grandparents about anywhere from 4 to 6 years. And so when we move up to Pennsylvania, and mind you, like where I was raised was in the backwoods, right? I had zero exposure to city life. I had zero exposure to um, any culture but my own. And so when I get to Erie, Pennsylvania, it's this melting pot of a bunch of different cultures. I'm no longer living in a country. I'm living in a city, and I'm like I'm like like a dead fish in water, right? Just waiting to get eaten up. And I didn't have exposure to public school. I went to private school when I was a kid, so there was just all kinds of pressure around, and I didn't know where I fit in. And on top of that, my dad is over here doing his thing. So when I would come home from school, right, the abuse would start small, right? He didn't want it to be known that, hey, this is really happening, but it would start small. He'd call me faggot, gay, right? Now terms like that would be are like praised, but back in the day, it's
They were
derogatory.
derogatory, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so the mental and emotional abuse is already starting to come into play. My sister is getting that too, but on a much larger scale. It turns physical with her. And then he kicks her out of the house and tells me, "Hey, she's not my biological daughter." So the one consistent thing that I had in my life from the moment that I can remember to that point in my life is being ripped away from me. He sends her down to my grandparents, and I no longer have any kind of consistency in my life. And so I'm trying to learn like how to swim per se, and it just got worse, right? So like the abuse went from mental and emotional to physical, right? Like I played baseball, I played soccer. My dad would throw baseballs at me and literally hit me. And if anybody were to ask any questions, I played baseball. You know what I
Can I
mean?
can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes, and this came about when I was doing an H&I meeting. I went to the detention center, and some some of the fellowship that I am a part of when it comes to the anonymous is
Hmm.
I believe in childhood trauma.
Oh yeah.
I believe in, as a child, I can't take responsibility for an adult
Yeah.
actions towards me in any type of abuse. Now, as I transition into an adult, I can take responsibility for my actions leading up and adding to my mental health and my substance use. But
Mhm.
I can forgive that adult or adults, parenting or guardian figure, as I recover on my spiritual journey with my conscious contact with my higher power. But I firmly believe that I, as a child, cannot take responsibility for the trauma that I endured or persevered through or God got me through as a child. Real quick before you continue your story, I wanted to get your thoughts on that because I feel like it's very poignant to what you're saying right now because a lot of people believe in other fellowships that you have to look at you what the part that you played, but as a child, what responsibility am I supposed to take to an adult that has the authority, that has the wherewithal, and I'm under their care to traumatize me? What do you think about that real quick, Sean?
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Up until I started my recovery, I took responsibility for it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
every single time that I would talk about it, somebody would always ask, "Well, what did you do?" The fuck do you mean? Do you
Right.
do you? Do you think that I went to a store and held a store at fucking gunpoint? No. I was a kid making childish mistakes, right? Like I was a kid that would go to a baseball game and I wouldn't hit a single ball, and then I'd come home and get brutalized because I wasn't as good of a player, right? Like that type of shit. And so no, I don't take responsibility for any of that because I didn't do that to me, and I didn't deserve it.
Right. I wanted to get your thoughts about that because I agree with you. There's no way that that makes sense on that side. Like I can't subscribe to that. I just can't. But I wanted to get your thoughts because I just felt like that's just the way God was speaking to me. It just came up and then you talked about it. And it's a part of my story as well. And I had childhood trauma. I have an ACE score. I have a high ACE score, adverse childhood
Yeah.
experience. I have that. So, but anyway, go ahead, continue. Thank you.
So it gets to a point I get into high school, and like I found my passion. I found where I felt I fit in. I was in the marching band. I played trumpet, mellophone. I loved music. I loved performing, all that stuff. And so I used that as my escape, my safe place. One of the two. My other safe place was sleeping, right? So if I was at home and I wasn't doing anything, I was sleeping because I didn't have to worry about anybody hurting me in my fucking sleep. If I was in marching band, my energy was there. Nobody's taking me away from that moment. But everything in between was pure chaos. School was chaos. Being at home was chaos. Just life in general was chaos. And I didn't. I felt like I didn't have anybody to turn to. And I've been asked this question, like, if the trauma was so bad, why didn't you tell anybody? Do you think that I really trusted anybody?
That's a good point. That's a good
Right?
point because I was going to ask that as far as yeah, because I asked that a lot. I was like, was there anyone that you could have talked to? Was there anyone not necessarily immediate family, but in the school setting? Was there any counselors, any teachers that you felt that you could trust? And you answered the question because I didn't have that either. And back then it was whatever happens in the house stays in the house.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and my dad's very imposing, right? Like he's no taller than me. I'm like 5'6", 5'5" on a good day, and I say on a good day, but uh,
On a good day.
the airborne shit. But anyways,
Right, right.
but I get to a point where like I'm noticing everybody cowering away from him, right? Like nobody wants to be involved with him because he's just aggressive. He's an aggressive human being. Um, so it that perpetrated so much because he knew people in the school system. He knew people. He knew police officers. He knew all these people, and I didn't feel like I had a place to turn to. So it was just it was rough. It was very rough, and it got to a point with the physicality that like one day I was in the kitchen. I was like 14 maybe, and I was in the kitchen. Can't remember what happened. He came home from school or from work for a weekend, and something had happened. It wasn't the punish. My point is punishment didn't fit the crime, and so he walks in, grabs me by my throat, squeezes it, dude, like he's choking it life out of me, lifts me up in the air. He's like, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." And I that was the first time like I legitimately was afraid of my dad for my life, and it should never have gotten to that point, but it did. And then it got worse and it got worse, right? Like so he would say go practice falling down in the backyard, and what that meant was like he's gonna throw me from fence post to fence post and beat the dog shit out of me. And that's what it was. That's what it was when I was a kid. I just learned at a certain point to shut the pain out and say it'll be over soon. And that's what ended up happening. I shut the pain out and I told myself it'd be over soon, and it eventually ended, and it would get worse before it got better. um, and I get to this point, right, where I get kicked out of my house. My dad he does the same thing to me that he did to my sister. Little do I know that what happened to me and my sister happened to him when he was a kid, right? So there's this generational trauma that happened, and I would only find this out a few years ago. But I got kicked out of the house at the age of 16. He sent me to my grandparents' house where I started like diving into who I felt I was and who I wanted to be. And I started getting into my my faith or what I believed in. So I started, attending church, getting really active in the church. Like I got into this point where I wanted to be a pastor. I went to a Bible college in Columbus, Ohio, that I wanted to subscribe to, and it was just it was crazy, right? And life was starting to look up for me at one point in my life. 1 second.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely can agree to that. My journey has taken me down a similar path and into pastoral and chaplain services that I believe should be a part of people's recovery, just like anything else. You have your talk therapy, you have your group, your one on one, your group therapy, your cognitive, your recreation, and I believe chaplain services should be offered to those who want those type of options as far as recovery. And so I agree with you. That's the journey that I'm going down now, is to
Yeah.
become a pastor and a minister, and honor my chaplain calling. So I feel you with that. But go ahead, continue. Yes, sir.
So sorry about that.
No, no
So
worries.
I ended up getting to this point where I wanted to be a pastor, and like I wanted to run it by my dad, right? Smart me. And so I said, "Hey, Dad, I want to be a pastor." And he said, "Absolutely not." He said, "No, that is not where you need to be." And I said, "Well, where do you think I need to be?" And he says, "You need to be in the military in sub capacity." 1 second.
That is Sean is talking with his
My
messing with his dog. I get it. I
No, no,
have
no.
one too.
My daughter, my daughter came up and she was over here. And
Oh,
I was like, "Hey, no, you
uh,
can't be."
that's fine. I love it. I love the authenticity. That is fine. Absolutely.
So him and I get into this like argument, full fledged screaming. Like I'm 16, I'm 17 at the time, screaming at my dad over the phone. I don't live with him, and he makes this 6 hour drive to drive me to a recruiting station. And he says, "If you don't sign a contract, I'm kicking you out of my family." And the dude, like, I had lost everything at that point. I had nothing else to live for, so I can't lose my family, right? So um, I ended up signing a contract that day, right? So I went into this recruiting station. Only two offices open were the Navy and the Army. And so I went to the Navy office and I looked at him and he said, "We're going to see if you're smart enough to join the Navy." And I said, "Well, this is not where I want to be." And then I turned the corner and the Army recruiter was like, "Hey, we want to know what you want to do with your life." And I was like, "I don't know. I'm 16, 17 years old. I don't know what I want to do with my life." So um, we end up signing a contract. I go to MEPS, do all the formality, and I get my ship date. And my dad's driving me. I ended up moving back up with my dad for the last 2 or 3 months before I joined the army, and it was just absolute hell, dude. Like I was working out every day, and we're not talking about working out like going to the gym. We're like the army PT standard every day. Like I was working, I was running 15 miles at a 6 minute pace, dude, every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like destroying my body because I my dad thought that I wasn't in shape, right, or like I wouldn't be able to make it. So I ended up going to Buffalo so that I could ship out the basic. My dad drives me up to the recruiting station, and like didn't get out of the car, no nothing. Um, I got out of the car. I was waiting for him to get out, give me a hug, and nothing. He turned around, drove off. Like he's your fucking problem now, and that hurt, right? Like that destroyed everything that I wanted, right? Like I was doing this to make him proud, not for myself. I was doing it to make him proud. It fucked me up.
How at that time, for, from the time you were 6 years old to the time 17, going on 18, till that point where your dad was like, man, he's your problem now. How did that transition into the military? Because I know for me, I was ready to get out too. I was 18. I could have graduated high school, but I wanted to walk early. I was a very smart kid, but just was tired of my dad and the situation. that we were going through, seeing the things he would put me, my brother, my mother through. I was ready to get away from Chocowinity, North Carolina. One, I didn't want to get trapped in the country. I didn't want to get trapped there working at Walmart, and I wasn't ready to go to school. So I was looking forward to, hey, you can send me wherever. But I still had that disconnect. I still didn't have that approval of my dad. How did that, all of that materialize for you in the military into what kind of soldier you became?
Pure hate.
Mm,
Pure hate. At first I was like, it started out where I was like, you know, I'm doing this because I want to make a better career for myself. I want to make a better life for myself. But in reality, did I? Right? And then I want to be a role model for my brother and my sister. Well, they both ended up in jail. So am I really achieving my goals that I set forward for myself? Right? And then I got to this point where I was like, I'm doing this out of spite. Like I'm doing this so that if I, and sorry for what I'm about to say, because it's really harsh. If I fucking die, that's on his conscience, right? Like he has to live with the fact that he did this to me, right? And I told him this, maybe on my last contract that I signed. He was like, do you are you done yet? And I said, I'm only done when they put me in a box so the army doesn't want me anymore, and you're gonna have to live with that because I was so spiteful, so angry with him that anything less than that would have been a lie. And so I ended up joining the army, right? And with the basic AIT airborne school, it was easy, with the exception of the fear of heights, right?
right,
That
same. That's funny. Same, same. Because I did the same exact thing too, exception with the fear heights until I got over them on like my third jump. Then I was like, let me just give into it. And I was after my third jump, maybe fourth jump, I was okay. But yeah, the fear of heights was ridiculous jumping out of a
bro,
plane.
not I still didn't get over the fear of heights, bro. Every time it was like the first time, I'm like, fuck, it was scary,
Yes, it
right?
is. It
But
is.
it's
It is different. It's different.
I learned that it wasn't the fear of heights; it was the fear of what was going through my brain when you're climbing up, right? Like, is my chute gonna
Hmm.
open up? Is my reserve gonna open up? Do
If
I have
somebody
a
gonna
will?
steal my air, if somebody gonna
Is
steal my air,
somebody
yes.
gonna steal my air? Am I
Yep.
gonna have a mid-air collision? Like,
Hmm.
what is gonna happen? Did I write? Do I have a will set in place if all else fails? Right?
Right.
Like, um, but I went through basic airborne and AIT, and then I got signed to 173rd in Italy, and like that was a free for all, right? That's where my addiction kicked off real heavily. That first week or first weekend I was there, they're like, "Hey, we don't care what you do, man." I was like, "Oh, okay." I'm 18 years old, don't know anything about liquor, don't know anything about beer, except for what my dad told me because he was an alcoholic. You never mix light and dark. And I was like, all right, fine. But I did, and so like I started on this journey of becoming a professional alcoholic from day one in the army, right? From my first, in that duty station 173rd. For 5 months, I drank every damn day like it was going out of style. Like I needed it to survive. And then we get our deployment orders. We go to Afghanistan in 2007. From 2007 to 2008, 15-month deployment. And that one was pure chaos. I didn't have anybody to live for. So it wasn't really traumatizing for me, right? Like firefights, I had a few close calls. It didn't bother me. We get back from that deployment and I'm on I get off the plane, off the bus, because they had to transport us from the Venice airport, of all places, to our duty station. And once we get there, get back, I'm not even 30 minutes off the bus, back in my room, and I'm already getting shit faced, right? And that relapse would happen for a year, and I just consistently drank. And many times that I ended up back in my room, blackout. I don't know what happened. I ended up in the hospital once for alcohol poisoning. I ended up in the hospital once for getting roofied. Like, dude, it was just like I made an ass out of myself consistently, and always pointed out other people and said that they were the problem. That I was, that they were the ones that had a problem with my drinking. So I go on my second deployment. Man, the second deployment was rough. It was pretty bad. I actually this past week just lost a buddy. He OD'd from that deployment. He was my gunner, one of my gunners. And but that loss gave me time to reflect on some of the things that happened on the deployment. It was pretty rough, but still nothing crazy. And I get back from that deployment, end up meeting my first ex-wife in Italy. She was American. Uh, we dated, whatever, and then she was 21 at the time. She was living with her parents over there. They PCS to Alaska. I PCS to Bragg. She met me uh, en route back or down to Bragg, and we ended up. She got pregnant. Right, we got married. She got pregnant. We had this kid on the way, and I always told myself, I don't want to be the father that my dad was to me. Right, like I want my daughter or my son to be loved and know that they're loved and not have to worry about any of that, not see the bullshit that I see when I was a kid. Because I seen a lot of bad stuff that happened when I was a child, and a lot of bad things happened to me. But I couldn't kick this drinking thing. It was somebody always said, "Hey, if you don't quit drinking, fill in the blank," and I would always, all right, fine. I'm just not going to drink because you asked me to, and I just don't want to put you in that position, or I don't want to lose somebody, right? And that's what it became a habit where, and that's where
Mhm.
those habit forming behaviors started, right? Like
Right.
I wasn't sober.
Right.
I wasn't proactively sober. I was reactively sober, but I wasn't even sober. I was dry drunk in it, and then a relapse would happen, and then I would blame somebody for that relapse. And so I go on my third deployment, by far the worst. One of the most traumatizing events in my life happened on that deployment, and that moment stuck with me for 10 years. And like I couldn't figure, I just couldn't get past it. Right. I got on that deployment. I watched my best friend die right in front of me, and it fucked me up good. It was hard.
Sean, real quick, would you say, because I've heard this too. When I when I share my testimony, when I share my story, excuse me, I always hear you knew what you signed up for. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe some of that, maybe that's partly true, but it does not negate the fact that being I was in two tours myself in '04, and then we went back in '06. 26 months total in theater. That still does not negate the fact that, yeah, I knew what I signed up for the most part. Okay. But that still does not negate the fact that there was still, I was in a foreign country fighting for my life with my brothers and sisters in arms, defending myself, getting into small arms fire, convoy, jumping into places, cooking for soldiers in different FOBs, forward operating bases where they didn't have dining facilities because it was one way in, one way out in these valleys and mountains. So in my recovery in some of these fellowships, some things I like, some things I don't. Um, I just don't like the part where they were like, you know what you signed up for. Yeah, okay, but that does not negate the fact that I still had trauma in the military, that
Yeah.
I was still subjected to trauma that I had defending rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
So don't just minimalize it as you knew what you signed up for. When you hear that, when you explain your testimony the way you are, how does that make you feel, understanding that what you did, what you was giving your life and sacrificing yourself to defend people, when they hear you in certain aspects of recovery, you signed up, you knew what you signed up for.
That's their right to feel that way. That what we did and what men and women before us did, that provided that freedom for them to feel that way, right? And not everybody's in the same boat. We're not on the same chapter as everybody else, right? And they have the right to feel that way. I mean, at the end of the day, I actually heard a good saying from a buddy of mine last week. I hadn't talked to him in years, and I found out he's been sober for 2 years, and it just blew my mind, right? And him and I were talking, and he said, "What happened to us wasn't natural. There's nothing natural about it, right? War is inevitable, but it's not natural, right? Jumping out of airplanes happens, but it's not natural. Staying up for hours on end on duties, not natural, but it happens, right? So." what we went through, it's not natural. There's a small percentage of people that can say that they've been through what we've been through, and an even smaller percentage that can say that they've had it worse. Not minimalizing anybody's stuff, and it sucks when people minimize our stuff, but it's not natural, and they have the right to feel the way that they do. Doesn't mean that their opinions are right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I watched my best friend die in front of me. It fucked me up good. And I had a situation literally moments after that happened where it was a conscious decision I had to make. Right, like he got blown up in an IED, dismounted IED, and I went to go to see if we had rear security. And I walk out this compound. Um, I'm looking down this alleyway, and there's this guy, Afghani man, walking. He has all white. He's got these prayer beads on. I'm assuming it's Friday. I can't remember what day it was. But he's counting these prayer beads, and like I pull my weapon up, dude, because like you got the devil and the angel on your shoulder telling you, like
Mhm.
fighting with each other, right? Like
Right.
the devil in me is like, take him the fuck out. The angel on my shoulders like, you don't know who he is, right? And then the devil's like, it don't fucking matter who he is. They took your friend. The angel on the shoulders like he could have a family, right? And like I put the crosshairs on his forehead, dude, and like my stuff was zeroed in. I was ready to go, weapon on semi, and then my humanity kicked in and I flipped it back on safe. He looked up at me as I had my weapon on his forehead, and I told him go, get. And that is the part that I'm so proud of, right? Because I didn't let the anger win. So probably one of the only times I didn't let the anger win. And on top of that, that would have been a war crime, and I would be in jail for a very long time. Anyway, so we get to this point where we go back home, but I'm not the same person that I was when I left. Right? Like I'm a completely different person. I'm completely shut off, angry. I hate everybody. But I still love my family. I still have that little bit in me, but I cannot be happy. I don't know. I can't figure out the happiness portion. Depression setting in. My traumatic brain injury started to get worse. Right, like I've been close to explosions. I've been in the IED in a truck myself. I've smacked my head on jumps. Multiple things are happening at that point. I go on my last deployment, and like last deployment was super easy. We're sitting in this hotel in the middle of Afghanistan and not doing a damn thing. With idle hands does the devil's work, right? So I start
Right.
thinking,
Right.
start start
Mhm.
thinking to myself, do I really love my wife, my daughter's mom? Am I in love with her? All these questions I shouldn't be asking myself, but I am, right? And so I come to this conclusion that like I'm not in love with my daughter's mom, and I break my family up, dude, just like my fucking dad did, right? And I'm starting all these trends that happen, and it is one thing after another, and it's just it's bad. 1 second.
Mhm. I definitely can relate to that. What Sean is saying is when we come back from theater, from war, it is not natural, but we are a piece of us, or pieces of us are left on the battlefield that we might get back or we may never get back. And that does change the dynamic of our mental makeup and our actions and how we see the world. But go ahead, brother. Go ahead and continue where you were.
Sorry about that. Door wasn't closed. I could hear her watching TV. Anyways,
It's all
anyways,
good.
if I can hear it, you can hear it. Anyways, so yeah, dude, I get back from that deployment and life is different. My daughter and her mom are being moved down to Georgia, Fort Benning, where she's with her family, and I had nobody to be sober for, so I relapsed. I relapsed super hard, and I ended up in that time I met my second wife, and she once again gave me that ultimatum, like you quit drinking or I'm done, and I did, and I was dry drunking it for a while, probably like 2 years. And then we went on a training rotation to Germany. I'm like, she's never gonna find out. She found out. Went
Mm-hmm.
on a training rotation to England.
Right.
She's never gonna find out. She found out. Bam. And so like for the longest time, like I lied to myself about that. I said, oh, that was nothing. But I relapsed, right? Like I
Yeah.
fucked around. I fucked
Right.
around and I found out. And so I get back and I get back from these rotations and I get promoted to staff sergeant. and they're like, "Hey, you can go pretty much anywhere you want to go. Here's your list." And so I handed her the list. We went to Alaska, the last standing airborne unit that I hadn't been to, and get to Alaska. We're about to go on a deployment with them, and we do this pre-deployment memory test, right, where it gauges your memory, your reaction time, all that good stuff. I fucking failed it miserably, and they looked at me and they said, "Dude, you need some help." And so they started working on me for the TBI stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't even recognize it until the nurse started bringing up these symptoms, and I was like, "Yeah, I got that, I got that, I got that." And life became systematically harder. Now, I will say part of it could have been, if you think about it, when people get diagnosed with a certain illness, that illness starts to be worse on them because they're hyper fixated on it, right? So if you get diagnosed with depression, people put that label on themselves, and then their depression gets worse. And that's what happened to me. All of my symptoms were getting exacerbated because I was hyper focused on that. And I'm not saying that it wasn't real, but I'm saying like I made it a little bit worse on myself.
And were you still drinking at that time?
No, so nope. So I quit drinking. I was sober. I was going to the gym, working on
Mm-hmm.
myself. And then I get home one day, and my at the time wife was like, "I'm cheating on you, and I'm not going to stop." So my faith is broken in another person, and I try to fight through it. I try to fight through it. I just didn't know where to turn. Right, like I'm in charge of a section full of guys because I'm working in the training room, right? Because I'm broken at that point. The army depends says that I'm broken. So I'm working on with these dudes. I can't talk to them. Can't talk to my first sergeant for sure because that dude he hates everybody. Can't talk to any other section sergeants because I don't get along with them. So like I really had nobody to turn to. Cinco de Mayo 2018, I relapsed, and that relapse lasted for about a month. And at the end of that month, I attempted suicide. Um, I put my truck in a tree at 70 miles an hour where I was drunk. And yes, I did get charged with a DUI because of that. But I didn't want I didn't want to be alive anymore, dude. Like I wanted the pain to be over, but I didn't want to be alive. I didn't feel like I had anything to live for. And when I woke up in the hospital, and I went home, I got dropped off at home. Um, one of the guys that worked for me stopped by the house because I guess he had heard what happened, and he said, "I don't feel safe with you being home by yourself." Right? Like I was living by myself at that point. So he took me into his home, and it was only then that I realized like I needed some help. So I checked into a inpatient treatment facility and on base, and like they taught me CBT and like all the good stuff, right? Retraining your brain, but it didn't stick with me because they only teach you they teach you those things in best case scenarios, not worst case scenarios.
What's CBT? What is that?
Cognitive brain therapy. So it's retraining your brain. It's recognizing the black and white thinking, the all or nothing thinking, like those thinking patterns that happen, and retraining your brain to think differently.
Okay.
It doesn't work with people that have brain trauma. I'm just gonna
it's
say that it didn't work.
it's a very it's a okay thing. It was hard for me because I didn't want to relive the thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to relive it. I didn't want to dissect it. I didn't want to break it apart. And the reason I asked, would you explain that or break that down, is because here I want people to understand terms and analogies, and the military loves their breakdowns and their acronyms, and I just wanted you to explain it. It works for a little while, but you have to be accepting of the fact that I'm going in here to relive trauma that I might not want to at this particular time because I am still pissed off and F the world.
Yeah.
Because that mentality is just, it is what it is. I hate to say that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I dislike saying that, but it is what it is with that mentality of F the world. at this particular moment. Listen, listen, listen. So we got 10 minutes, and this is something that I want to do and I haven't done yet, but I would like to have you back on next week to finish because I have questions. I still want to talk to you, but I want to get into like after everything that you shared, where was your mom? I want to get into where was your mom and what was she thinking in all of this in the situation. I want you to finish where you were, and I want you to give the audience and the viewers and the listeners what helped Sean get through all this trauma to get his mental stability back where it needed to be to live for him. Because you did say something I felt that was very important, maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago, where you were saying, I didn't have no one to be sober for. I think that's very important to just, I think that's a key thing that you said is I didn't have anything to be sober for because you hadn't experienced that you had to be sober for yourself. But I want you to come back on next week
Yeah.
and finish your story if you would like to. I
Oh,
think we got to
absolutely.
do that in this regard. So
We do.
yes, we got about that's it. We got about 9 minutes. I want to. I always end it like this, and I'm gonna end it like this next week as well. But I always tell people, give me a couple things they're grateful for, because when we go speak, we share our stories and testimonies, especially in hospitals and institutions. When we do H&I, Um, I tell the fellas, I tell the sisters, I tell my brothers and sisters, when mental health triggers substance use, suicide, human trafficking, in people that like us who have endured, and when I say endured, I mean persevered through and built a resilience um, to be of service now. We didn't stay stuck or we didn't die. Um, we survived and we're surviving and we're living not perfect, but in pursuit of hope for others. And in turn, that gives us hope and in turn gives us the ability to be of service, which I thank you for your service, not only in the military, but in your service of mental health, substance use, and recovery in your platform. I thank you for your service in that. That takes a lot of strength and courage to tell your testimony. It's not easy. And the reason I ask for the few things you're grateful for is when life comes, I know for me, I focus on that glass half empty, the things that I don't got, instead of the things and the blessings that I do have to hold on when life gets heavy or when life is lifing on life's terms. So give us a few things that you're grateful for. And you can give us the same things next week, or they could be different. I know it's more than a few, but something that you hold on to that you can have in your first aid kit that can get you to pick up the phone to call Derek or Chris or someone in your network to get you to that triage point. Because that's what I call it. It's your first aid kit. Some people say toolbox, but I say this first aid kit because you have things in your first aid kit that stabilize you to get you to triage.
Yeah.
So, what are those things for you, Sean?
Oh, first, I'm grateful for my daughter. Uh, it helps remind me that I did something good,
Mm,
right? Like
that part, I like that.
my daughter, she's the smartest child I know, and she challenges me every all the time, and so it gives me that opportunity to remind myself like I've done some good, right? Like I might not be the best person, but this kid is living proof that I'm not a complete piece of shit. Uh, uh, secondly, I'm grateful for the people in day one. I'm that day one shit. I am grateful for them because they remind me of where I was. Right, the gift of desperation. That that moment where you feel like you have nothing, and then you're at the bottom and you're looking up and you're like, I don't know where to go. I remember
Mm,
that. I know
me too.
I remember how it feels, dude.
Me too, brother. Me too.
I remember sitting in that jail cell, dude, saying I don't know what to do, right? Like, and that's that's another thing I'm grateful for, and I'm grateful for all the people that I've encountered in my life, good and bad, because without those people in my life, I wouldn't learn the lessons that I live, I've learned. I wouldn't have encountered those people, and I wouldn't be able to without other people my story wouldn't be what it is. Um, and I'm not saying that that everybody that I've encountered in my life is bad. There's been some phenomenal people, but those people have given me pointers, or the way that other people act and react to each other uh, gives me that opportunity to look at myself and say, okay, where am I at mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and how do I move past that? And I'm happy for my I'm grateful for my sobriety because I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm grateful for my sobriety, being clean, another day. I'm grateful for the God of my understanding, who I choose to call God, my higher power. I'm grateful for my wife for loving me through a lot of my ish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I'm grateful for understanding that I don't have to be perfect, and I can enjoy the journey of life with my brothers and my sisters and my community. And I'm grateful for you. The listeners, the viewers. Um, this is what it's all about. And I am very blessed and honored to be able to do this, be able to be of sober mind and vigilant enough to do this. Sean, where can people find you and get in touch with you if they have questions or just want to pick your brain about recovery and mental health and the things that you do on your podcast, Sitting with Sean?
Yep, yep. So you can find me on my personal page on Facebook, Sean Young, spelled just like on the screen, or for anybody listening, SEAN YOUNG. I'm a dude with a big beard that, and a bald head because my hairline's running away from me. Instagram, and I don't really do Twitter. Twitter's an ugly place, but Instagram, you can find me at Sitting with Sean. TikTok, you can find me at the Beard of Maryland, and you can find me on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Sitting with Sean. Sitting with Sean. I've got a few projects I'm working on, but my baby is Recover Out Loud, and it's doing the same thing that Derek's doing here. And I think what you're doing, Derek, is a thankless job, but it's a job that needs to be done. More of experience, strength, and hope. The more that we share our story with other people and get the message out that recovery works if you work it. Uh, we need people like you on the front lines, man. So if you ever get to that point where you're like, I don't want to do it anymore, just remember we need people like you, Derek.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's was a calling put on me by my higher power to do something not only for being of service, but also helps me stay clean as well. It does work if you work it. I know those cliches are like whatever, but I used to feel like that way. They're just cliches, or just saying, but it does work if you work it, and it does work if you want it. You gotta want it, just like you wanted that substance or that activity or whatever it is that you wanted to use to make you feel or escape the situation in a negative way. I always tell people it's that same type of hustle, that same type of mindset. But listen, you're coming back up here next week. You will be my guest next week because we have to finish this story, a powerful and wonderful story. My fellow veteran, my fellow brother in arms, my fellow brother in this fight of recovery and mental health. I love you, Sean. And yeah, we'll pick up here next week. And until then, hey, peace and love and blessings be with you, my brother.
All right, you too, brother.
All right, I see you soon. Too sweet.
Sweet.
All right, peace. Uh, that's what we do here. Play the tape. Again, excuse me for my voice. I'm a little under the weather, but I still had to make it work. I can't let that stop me. I couldn't let that stop my brother coming up here sharing his testimony, his experience, strength, and hope. Listen, if no one hasn't told you today that they love you, I love you, we love you, God loves you. There are people that would jump down in that pit with you because they know the way out. People like myself, people like Sean, people like my past guests, people like my future guests. That's what we do. We're a community. You never are alone, never again. With peace comes understanding. With understanding comes love. With love comes faith. And with faith comes hope. And with hope comes recovery. Whatever that may look like for you, remember it's inspirational change moving forward. You don't ever have to use or pick up ever again. You don't ever have to let that mental health diagnosis or that depression, or even if you're not diagnosed, you don't ever have to let that define you ever again. Hey, until next week, till next time. Peace.